and my co-moderator. I'll start with Judge Gabrielle Wolhosen. Tom, what am I doing wrong? Judge Wolhosen was appointed to the appeals court by Governor Deval Patrick in 2008. Prior to that, she was a partner at Hale & Dorr, then Wilmer Hale, or vice versa. She also served as associate independent counsel on the Whitewater investigation. I'm going to go in a different order on our panel because I have to start with the Honorable Judge Raya Drebin, who I did tell this week is my Massachusetts RBG. I'm just saying. Judge Drebin graduated from Radcliffe in 1949 and Harvard Law School in 1954. She then clerked to the District Judge Bailey Aldrich, which, ironically, as did Judge Wolhosen. She then became a teaching fellow at the University of Chicago Law School and worked in several firms before becoming an associate and subsequently a partner at Palmer & Dodge. She joined the appeals court, thank goodness, in 1979, and she was the second woman appointed to the court shortly after Charlotte Peretta. She retired from the court in 2011 and then did do some work as a recall judge for the court, and I dare to say she was probably the mentor to at least half of the court. I never worked with her, but consider her my mentor as well. To Judge Raya's right and your left is Judge Ellie Seifer. Most of you know Judge Seifer. She joined the appeals court in December of 2000, and in 2017 she was elevated to the Supreme Judicial Court, where she currently serves. During law school, Judge Seifer worked for a general practice firm, Grayer, Brown, and Dilday. She then became an assistant district attorney and rose to the level of chief of the appeals division in the Bristol County District Attorney's Office. She is an adjunct faculty member at Suffolk. She's also taught at UMass Law. She is on the book, as they say, for the Mass Practice series of criminal procedure, which she annually updates. She currently teaches, and I'm fascinated to learn more about this, feminist legal theory at Suffolk this semester. So we're thrilled that she was able to return to her home at the appeals court. To Judge Seifer's right and your left, we all know she almost needs no introduction, Attorney Lena Wong. Attorney Wong attended Cornell University and Boston College Law School. She joined the appeals court in 1993. She then left to go to the Supreme Judicial Court, but lucky for us, she returned to her home at the appeals court in 2001 until she retired in 2020. And when she left us, she was the first assistant clerk of court. Moving down the bench to Judge Drebin's left and your right, Attorney Jane Hong graduated from Boston College Law School in 1983. After graduation, she clerked at the New Mexico Court of Appeals, then came to Boston and worked at a small firm. She was then hired here and has been here as a staff attorney since 1986. And a fun fact, this won't be in the trivia bowl, but she was interviewed by Judge Drebin for the job. So things do come full circle. And last but not least, to Attorney Hong's right and your left is Attorney Gina DeRossi. Attorney DeRossi was hired as the court administrator for our court in 2018. Prior to that, she had been elected to 2 terms as the Register of Probate in the Bristol County Probate and Family Court and had been a practitioner in the area of probate and family law, something near and dear to my heart, for 13 years. So panel, thank you so much for joining us, and we're really looking forward to the discussion, which I will then start with my friend Gabrielle.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see 5 talented female attorneys up on the bench at one time.
That needs a clap.
Yep. So I think that we have a lot of history here on this panel, and of course, our earliest representative of that is Judge Drebin. Judge Drebin was my mentor when I got on the court, and I quickly learned how lucky I was that she was my mentor. I learned not only how to become a part of this court, but the beginnings of how to become a judge. I'm hoping someday to become a good judge, the way Judge Drebin was. there was a huge difference in the legal world between the time when I grew up to be a lawyer, as I grew up, and the time when Judge Drebin did. It started as early as law school. When I was in law school, 50% of my class were women, and I'm positive that was not the case for Judge Drebin. So, Raya, I'm hoping that you can begin our discussion by describing some of your earliest experiences when you joined the court, and perhaps talk about what it was to be one of the first 2 women to be appointed here, to walk into an institution that was both in many ways formed and led by men at that time, what it was like to find your own judicial voice within that context, and how to make your voice heard. So take us wherever you'd like.
Well, the first experience I had was looking at briefs and seeing that they were for real, that they weren't moot court. And it was a very exciting moment to feel that this was a real case. When I came into the court, the only woman was Charlotte Peretta, and it was a good thing that there was another woman. When Dr. Dukakis interviewed me, one of the things I told him was that when there's only one woman, she's not heard. But even for a long time when we were here, neither Charlotte nor I were heard. One of the first things was that we both felt that we were not really accepted, that they would have preferred to have trial judges and men trial judges come rather than have us come. And it was shown in many ways. The first time I sat, it was a very funny feeling. But the next day, Judge Graney, I sat with Judge Graney, and I think it was Judge Hale. And I was so awed the next day when Judge Graney wrote the most wonderful opinion. And in one day, he had done a masterful work. And I felt, my goodness, do I really belong here? Then, when we sat, one of the earliest cases I sat on, one of the judges wanted, well, I'll go back a little bit. In the beginning, when we sat, we sat in terms of seniority. The chief of the panel would get the first case, the next senior person would get the second case, and the third person would get the third case. Eventually, the bar we recognized how this worked, and then it was changed and made random. But at first, it was 1, 2, 3. And I was in a slot. And one of the judges, who was the senior at the time, didn't want me to write it. He thought I wouldn't be able to do it. However, I insisted. Then another occasion, we also had a system whereby if we circulated to all the judges, then we were 10 judges. And if an opinion had a dissent and the majority of the whole court agreed with the dissent, then the chief judge would add 2 people to the panel. We had a case called Commonwealth v. Stevens, which was a case involving a black defendant and a white victim. And the question was whether or not the trial judge should have asked certain questions when the defendant had requested to have these questions asked about racial bias. The trial judge did not do it, and the question was that reversible error? It was error. It wasn't reversible because it wasn't a constitutional error, so it only applied prospectively. But Judge Cutter and Judge Hale were on the panel. Judge Cutter was sitting as a senior judge, having retired from the SJC. And the two of them, I think originally Judge Cutter had written the opinion, and I dissented. I thought that it fit within two other cases, Sanders and Hobbs, and that since there was violence and there was sex, that this was similar to the rape case, which was Sanders, and the child case, which was Hobbs, where you had interracial violence and so on. Well, it was circulated to the majority of the court, and the majority of the court agreed with the dissent, my dissent. And I had such pressure put upon me to change my view. And it was really very, very difficult to withstand Cutter and Hale. However, I did, and I went to Judge Hale, and I said, if I had been Judge Grant, you would have added 2 people to the panel. And then he immediately did. After that encounter, which was really very pressured on me, especially by Judge Cutter, and I think he felt that he could do it because he knew me from Palmer and Dodge, I felt that I had to give them candy, and I gave both of them a box of candy. I would never do that now, but I did it then. And then I also did it to the judge who had wanted to take away a case from me. Later on, there was another judge who was sitting in this courtroom who wanted to take away a case from me, but again, I wouldn't let them. It was a tough court in the beginning, not only towards women, but in general. There was a cartoon in Lawyers Weekly which had somebody coming out of a doorway full of a man full of tatters, and his suit was all ragged, and above the doorway was appeals court. And when 2 of the judges, Judges Hale and Judge Grant, sat together, when they sat separately, each of them was very courteous to lawyers. But when they sat together, for some reason or other, they got very nasty to lawyers, and it was really sometimes embarrassing. I remember Judge Peretta would turn her chair to the back so she wouldn't be involved in that. Judge Brown also could be difficult, especially on prosecutors, but I used to write him notes and say, please be kind. And sometimes he would listen, but sometimes he wouldn't. And there were other little things. They had a big bathroom on the 15th floor. The male judges each had, on each side of the corridor, there were bathrooms. When the women came, when Judge Peretta and I came, we had to use the bathroom that the secretaries or administrative assistants used, and the clerks, the women clerks. And it was a very small bathroom. But the men, not the judges, the clerks and the other staff members of the court had a very big bathroom. And I insisted that we switch and that the women get the big bathroom because there were many more of us. Then the men, Judge Peretta and I sat on a certain place on the court on the 15th floor, and many times, and this bothered Judge Peretta more than me, but the men would go by and just ignore us, and when they went out to lunch. It wasn't all of them, but a group of them. And so for many years, we didn't eat with the men. to me, it didn't matter so much because when I had practiced law, not at Palmer and Dodge, but one of the other firms, the men used to come by and say, Raya, if you wore pants, you could come to lunch with us.
Are you wearing pants today, Raya?
Yes. And I guess I guess my greatest achievement on the court was eventually getting the men to recognize that women judges could be just as good as men judges. And I was really very proud of that.
Right, could I ask you, you did serve on the first all-woman panel that the court held. Could you
did.
describe your experience on that panel?
Well, the funniest thing was one of the lawyers said, gentlemen. It was wonderful. It was with Judge Fine and Judge Peretta and me.
Thank you so much. Jane, Judge Drebin was one of the people that interviewed and hired you.
Yes,
When you came to the appeals court, you were a young lawyer, and I know we can share, starting out with a new family. How did you find working at the court and balancing being a staff attorney and raising a growing family?
This was a terrific place for all of those things. Judge Drebin, when she interviewed me, and I don't think she remembers saying this, but I remember her saying very distinctly, this is a great job for a mother. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. One of the best things about this court at that time was that it understood the need for a flexible and part-time work schedule for a lot of us staff attorneys. And during the time when my children were young, I worked a variety of different schedules. I worked full-time and lots of different part-time schedules. And whenever I asked to change my schedule, Alex McNeil and Dan Thurler, who were my managers, always said yes. And the chief justices at that time, whoever they were, always approved it. And I wasn't the only one to benefit from the flexible work schedule. I mean, a lot of us staff attorneys participated in it, took advantage of it. And I think that's one of the reasons that so many of us stayed for so long at the court, and I think it made us better workers. And I'm certain that it made us better workers for it. And I'd also like to give a shout out to one of the other great things about having worked here is that I had a great experience working with the other staff attorneys in this court, past and present. They are the kindest, most generous, most hardworking, smartest group of lawyers you'll ever find anywhere. And great shout out, big shout out to them.
Jane, when we were preparing for today, you shared with me that if not the first, you were among the first to ever have taken maternity leave from the court.
I think that that is true. I think that I was the first, yeah.
Can you imagine?
They had to, it was great though. I mean, they were so agreeable to anything that I asked. It was, and I don't think I understood how lucky I was back then, but I totally appreciate it now.
Justice Seifer.
Hi.
Hi. We all know and we tell so many young lawyers how important it is to find good mentors and good role models. And certainly when I was coming up through the ranks, I had both very important male role models when I was in practice and female role models. And so I was but when I came to the court, I had the benefit, as I said, of having Raya as my judicial mentor. When you came to the court, you had a male mentor. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the importance of having female mentors, but also male mentors, and also what differences you think it made on your own view within the court of the role for women to play in bringing along the younger women.
Thank you for that, excuse me, thank you for that question. It's so nice to be here and look out and see so many familiar faces, even if I can only recognize half of you because of the mask, that top half of you. Just kidding. I've been thinking a lot about mentoring lately, and one of the things that I just want to get out of the way, contrary to what any of you think, Scott Kafker has not been and will never be my mentor. I also have a confession to make, and that is that when I was a prosecutor, I had an intern who actually had applied to be an intern. She was in law school. She was a summer intern. She was actually my brother's fiance. And she was very, very shy and quiet and very reticent, and really actually probably didn't want to be a lawyer. But she was a great writer, and I worked with her all summer on a really hard second-degree murder case that eventually became, I think, Acevedo. And she was just terrific, and I thought I had done a really good job with her. But then, when she changed careers and she called me up, she didn't call me, she called my partner Sharon, who's a CPA, and said, can you help me? I want to change careers and go more into finance. And Sharon said, sure. And she said, oh, great, I've never had a mentor before. So I thought, what the heck did I do all that time? So the joke has always been that I can't do it, and I do believe that. I think, for me, it's something very much based on an individual relationship, and I think I want to say first, mentoring from the appeals court for me started when I was an assistant DA, because it was Susan Mellon and at the SJC in the clerk's office, and Lena Wong and other clerks at the appeals court, Joe Stanton, who actually were my mentors on how to get through and do an oral argument and get through and be there and show up at the right place at the right time. And so they were really terrific, that kind of mentoring. And now I rely on mentoring from Maura Looney. She tells me what to do. I also have to say that as I on the appeals court, before I get to the male-female thing, I felt very supported at the appeals court by our chief then, Chris Armstrong. There was never any question in my mind that he was treating us equally. He made sure that I had what I needed and that everything went well. And so I will always remember and thank him for that. And Phil Raposa, who has been a mentor in many ways throughout the years because I had known him in Bristol County, has also, I think, been a mentor because, both Chris, Chief Justice Armstrong and Chief Justice Raposa have a quality about them that is very, they have integrity, and that they're professional, and that they're kind people, and so they're people to look up to, I thought. So then, moving on, also, while I was an ADA, the judges on the appeals court, I as an ADA, and maybe Justice Grant can attest to this, I preferred to argue in front of the appeals court much more than the SJC. And the reason was the appeals court was a hot bench, and you would come in, you didn't just have to sit there for hours waiting for your case and then in silence while nobody asked questions. So it was always interesting and it was always challenging. Whereas at the SJC sometimes it was rather quiet. And there were moments where nobody would ask you anything, and so, especially if you're doing a first-degree murder, which is usually what we did, and it was, that's just a bad assault and battery that went a little wrong, so it's not that interesting. And so I do think that I admired those judges on the appeals court so much. So I was very thrilled to get the chance to come work with them. Now, as far as mentoring at the appeals court, is Peter Sachs here? No.
He
All
was.
set. His father-in-law was my mentor, Justice Jacobs, so I can say whatever I want now. And I knew Justice Jacobs from Bristol County. I had argued cases in front of him on the appeals court. I had argued in front of him at the Superior Court. I had cases with him then. And he was very attentive as a mentor, showing me how he did things and wanting, and, you know, to do it this way, do it this way. And he also took it upon himself to make sure he picked me up every morning we had court. Like at 5 in the morning, he'd pick me up at my house and we'd drive into Boston, and the mentoring would be also en route. And often it was about driving. He always drove. He did not think women were good drivers. So he was tutoring me as we were going along, you know, but he was always driving. Finally, I got him to let me drive. And I drove us home one day. And he was a nervous wreck, and he also didn't think I passed enough cars. You know, I needed to be more aggressive in my driving, and then he told me a story about butterfly wings and how if you slow down here, you're slowing down all the other traffic. So that was my last time driving him. He took over driving again. But I was, you know, and he was a wonderful person, although this is 100% true about him not thinking women could drive. Absolutely true. But I was always a little jealous of the people who were mentored by Rhea, because I thought they had gotten some secret knowledge that I hadn't known, that I didn't know. So, and they were always turning out so great. So I was really just a little bit jealous of them being her mentor, but I will say she did take me under her wing and invite me to her home. You know, we spent some time on the beach. Now, I was just coming, it was not the year 2001 maybe by then, and summertime. I'm just coming out of a long stint from a law enforcement environment where I'm not telling anybody anything. And she's doing her best on that beach to find out as much as she can. And I'm doing my best on that beach not to tell you. Because I just didn't know my territory yet. But she was wonderful in that way, and always provided help, and you could always approach her. So that was really terrific. The one person I want to mention who's here who doesn't know he's been my mentor is Justice Graney. And the reason he was my mentor is, first of all, I really wish I'd been able to sit with him on the bench. I missed him at the appeals court and I missed him at the SJC. But when I was in court and arguing in front of him, and then Justice Cowan, who also became a fabulous mentor by her example, on the SJC, watching her, but you know, his questions and his writing were just so good that I really absorbed a lot of that and watched him and read him. And then when Justice Cowan was on the SJC and things had started to get liven up, you know, there'd been changes and they were getting very lively, I would watch her and just be very impressed and watch what questions she asked and learn about that. So in summary, I think the other point I want to make is that going forward, we all have a duty to each other to bring up the next generation and to help each other and to mentor each other, because I think we're always doing that all the time in some way. And as I've been thinking about that a lot, especially since I've been teaching and talking to a lot of law students, and I have my law clerks, is that thinking about that, I realize how important it is to be open to them and to talk to them honestly about your experiences, what worked, what didn't work, and to keep doing it. But I've also been thinking a lot, you know, at the SJC we have a wellness committee and a project on wellness and lawyer wellness. And I was thinking about how that worked with my career as I went through it, and like you, Jane, I loved doing appellate work because I knew I was coming to court, so I could know what to do with my son that day and not worry about, I got to go and hurry up and get in there for an emergency trial or something, although Susan Mellon, you did do a few of those to me. But so it was really a good job for raising children. And I think that one thing that women, you know, we've been, okay, you and Judy, I'm sorry, Justice Cowan, sorry. Sorry. It's just, I feel so comfortable with you all. You broke through hard doors and ceilings, and then I think my generation was able to come through, and it's easier. But now I think we're here, there's more of us. We have a chance to change the system to some extent. And as I look at the system, what I see is that it is of course it's a court, so it's hierarchical, but in general, women have a lot to offer, other women and men, because I think that men and women growing up in a top-down hierarchical, male-dominated society is not healthy for anybody, and it's not healthy for all of us. So in terms of lawyer wellness, I'd like to see more women stand up and say, you know what, life-work balance is important, part-time work is important, making that connection between wholeness and integrating your life is important, and there's no reason that the men or the women should have to be tense or worried about getting to work or whatever it is. We need to be, I think, more supportive in that regard of each other, and admire our strengths, everybody's strengths, be tolerant of our weaknesses. So I don't know if I have any other questions.
I'm going to just tell one motherhood story, which was that I was on trial as a lawyer in the probate and family court, and I said to the clerk, I'm going to have to pay for extra daycare. It's $5 the first minute, $10 the second minute that you're late. And they're like, go. I drove crazy up 93. I get to the daycare, and they're like, oh, Amy, you didn't bring your son to daycare today. Yeah, my husband was home with him. Only one speeding ticket that night. Lena, when I came, Judge Wolahojian was my mentor, still my mentor, and she gave me a list of rules, and if it wasn't one, it was two. Do whatever Lena says. I think everybody in this room would say that.
We'll follow that. Why am I sitting here then?
Now, we talked about when you joined the court, you had a little bit of a different experience because there was a woman that was the clerk, a woman that was the chief court officer, there were folks in IT that were female. We had 3 women judges at that point, now we're up to 11, we're getting there. Sorry, Chief, we're looking for a whole slate, and you talked to me about a woman, a doctor, who was not a lawyer, who really had an impact on you and really opened your eyes as to what women can do to lift each other up. I was wondering if you would share some experiences that you shared with us about her.
Sure. And this, if anybody heard Judge Shin's remarks yesterday about who's a native English speaker, this particularly resonates. Weili Wong was a longtime doctor in the clerk's office. She immigrated to the States from Hong Kong as a young girl. Started working, I think she worked in Dorchester District Court before coming to the appeals court. English was her second language, but she could speak and read Chinese, which I can't do. She mastered 3 case management systems. That's something around here. But part of her job was answering the phone, going to the counter. She understood appellate process and procedures as well as anybody. And what if she'd gotten that phone call from some attorney saying, are Judge Shin and Judge Singh native English speakers? How humiliating was it to try to deal with these questions when you didn't have a grasp of the language? It's tough enough, even I, who tells everybody what to do, plenty of questions come my way or came my way, I'm like, I don't know, but I bluffed my way through in unaccented English. So my hat was off to her and her courage in getting up every day and doing this, and with good cheer, very good cheer. But getting back to the mentor question and what Judge Cipher said, I never really had a mentor per se. I'm watching everybody all the time, and I'm trying to pick up something from everybody, and that is why my shout out is also to the secretaries who were here and helped me a whole lot. Jane was already here. There were plenty of women attorneys, judges that, but the non-attorneys, they were so strong and so helpful.
I would second that.
So that's that story.
Lena, I don't know what's going on with my mic. you were in a management role as first assistant clerk. Did you experience any gender discrimination or pushback from, we don't have to name names, staff or judges that you think was because you're a woman and a woman of color?
I will say, and I don't know what this says about me, when people ask me questions, well, what do you think of so-and-so? My first reaction is, if I don't have well, he never did anything to me that I know of. So, but I honestly don't think that was an issue for me.
Gina, you're our court's first court administrator, and for those of you who don't know, our court administrator is the highest administrative officer in our court, and the portfolio for that person is broad and sometimes opaque. And the role was held by only men before you arrived, and I'm thinking in particular Alex McNeil, who really created and became synonymous in some sense with that role. And so when you came here as the first woman to be our court administrator, do you felt that the fact that you were a woman played any particular role in how you had to navigate your way through the job or the issues that came before you, or how you were perceived or your form of leadership was perceived? So it's a broad question, but take it where you like.
There's a lot there, Judge, but, okay, so I didn't think so. So let me start by saying that I honestly didn't think about it when I came on. I didn't know Alex. I didn't know either of the two gentlemen that preceded me as court administrators. What I was told when I got this job was that, and even when I applied for it and interviewed, was that they were reimagining the position and that they were trying to change the position to something very different than what it had been previously. So this was going to be something new. And, not sure how this was messaged outside of that, but I had been in a leadership position for many years prior to taking this position on, and I had managed men and women, and I had, won an election against, 5 men that ran against me, and so I was like, okay, I just didn't think it was an issue. But I will say that when I finally did come on, after time, I did start to sort of realize that me being a woman actually did matter. And, it was over time that certain things, mostly I think it had to do with the perception. And I hate to talk about the old adage, because I think that this was true at the beginning of my career and continues to be true today, and I think a lot of women will probably agree with me. But, that old adage that, women that are bold and strong and, independent and, God forgive me, but heaven forbid, opinionated, we're characterized as being a bitch. But men that possess those same characteristics, they're considered strong leaders. And, that's something that I had experienced early on in my career, and I thought that as my career, progressed, that I would see that less and less. And I sort of did, but it ebbed and flowed. I think what I find is the biggest challenge now is the realization that that characterization is not just held by men. That perception is not just held by men. It's held just as much by women. And I think that is my biggest struggle. Because while, we're talking up here about, how do we move, our cause forward? How do we help each other as women really, push each other up through that glass ceiling? It's not men that are holding our ankles down. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that, there was a Chief Justice that was willing to give a strong, independent, opinionated woman an opportunity to be the first female court administrator of the Massachusetts Appeals Court, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. But I also know that those qualities sometimes get perceived to be a certain way. And I think, being in a management position is sometimes difficult because it requires having to temper how those qualities get perceived by people that are not accustomed to having a woman sort of articulate themselves a certain way. And I think some of this is just natural, It's not natural for women to, we want to kind of say, oh, women, we're supposed to be caring and empathetic and nurturing, and we can be that, but we can also be dominant, we can also be leaders. We can also be loud, and that doesn't make us wrong. That doesn't make us, something other than the man that's sitting next to us. And I feel that struggle continues, unfortunately. I'm a work in progress. And, I think that all of the people that I work with and all of the people that, that I sort of manage with me, encourage me every day to continue to fight the fight. But I think if there's one thing that I'm learning moving forward, it's that, the women have to continue to help the women. But to answer a question that hasn't been asked, but that was asked of Lena, I have not experienced gender bias, here at the appeals court, at least not in its traditional sense. I feel like, everybody here has been extremely welcoming in that sense, and I think that the men champion women here. I think we all need to champion each other here, and I think, we'll be seeing more of that moving forward. And, I'm hoping that there will be a woman at some point in the Chief Justice's office at some point, but I'm going to tell you right now, there are going to be growing pains when that happens. And I think until that day comes, we can all say, oh, it's just going to be a natural evolution. There's going to be a woman there. You know what? It doesn't matter who the woman is. The perceptions from that, from everybody else when that day happens is probably going to be a surprise to the woman who gets into that office. And I can't wait to have a conversation with whomever that woman is.
So before we move to our next question, there are two people that, because of various considerations, were unable to join us on the panel, but two women that work for the court that I really want to recognize. The first is Monique Duart, who is our operations manager. I think everyone on this panel and in the courtroom would say Monique is the real boss. The other person, and she's not in the courtroom with us today, is Shernette Montgomery, our only woman court officer. So, we've heard from each of you individually. We have judges, we have clerks, we have staff attorneys, we have court managers. We have a packed courtroom here, and in our overflow courtroom in courtroom 3, now the Armstrong courtroom, we have a number of young law clerks and interns, men and women. And so I'm wondering for those, particularly for that audience, if we could just sort of go down the line and ask you, what advice do you have for someone who wants to be a clerk?
Well, I kind of fell into it, so I'm not going to be able to give any kind of structured answer. I think the appeals court, because in the trial courts, the clerks are elected and they don't necessarily have to be attorneys. So if we're going to talk about the appeals court, you have to be an attorney, and it would be good to have some trial experience, and it would be good to have appellate experience. So, but there's, it really, it's I think there's a lot more behind the scenes, a lot more administrative and sort of paperwork, or not paperwork anymore, that people aren't aware of. Like, well, we're pretending we're still a paper court. So every piece of paper that comes in and out of the court has to go through the clerk's office. So there isn't, when I started, there was a whole lot of non-glamour parts, stuffing envelopes. If you've seen those big yellow clerk's envelopes out there, bringing those paper real briefs down to the storage room. When we were in the high-rise, we had to use the prisoner's elevator and call the van room to, send it up and bring it back. So the job is a lot different from when I started, but, and I'm not sure that anybody, like I say, I never thought of it as a goal, but just like with anything, whatever job you're in, as a lawyer, then you've got to work hard. There's going to be horrible days and cases you lose, cases that are losers. And then if you come up, I appeared before Judge Brown as a Department of Correction attorney, and he claims he doesn't remember any of it, but he ruined my 30th birthday. And it was really tough thinking, I can, go to work at this place, and how am I going to talk to these judges? And I'm afraid I was terrified. But, it just, whether it's as a clerk or, whether you're a litigator or you're working in a corporation, I think you're always going to have to deal with these scary situations. You have no idea what's going to come of it. But if it turns out you did your best, you did your best, and it didn't work out, then that's okay.
Judge Seifert, could you speak to both, any advice for someone that wants to be a prosecutor and a judge?
Oh, sure. May I say something first? So I just want to say, I think, thinking about it, that I would like to have a round of applause for Justice Cowan and Justice Drebin, because they broke through for us. I am very grateful. This applies to both prosecutors and law clerks or young lawyers or interns, who's ever listening. I would say the first thing, if you want to be successful in your career in law in Massachusetts, is to remember how small Massachusetts is, and remember everybody you meet on the way up, you can meet on the way down. So just treat every single person as an equal and with respect, which everybody should be doing anyway, but sometimes you have to tell them. So just constant generosity of spirit and openness and politeness, which doesn't mean you have to let anybody push you around. There are ways to handle those things. And then the other thing is, everything you say in court or in an interview or in a case or in a hallway anywhere, just make sure your word is honorable and that it's something you won't mind hearing repeated, and that it is also, you keep your word, because your credibility in court is probably going to be the most important thing as an attorney. I would also tell lawyers, and coming up either as prosecutor, any job, ask for help if you don't know something. And there's so many areas that they're not substantive, but they're little things like, where am I supposed to sit, or something like that, or I remember asking Justice Parada, do I have to wear a skirt on my first sitting day? And she said, you never have to wear a skirt again. And that was the thing I couldn't ask Justice Jacobs. And I also would say that, generally women tend to think that they're not as qualified for something, or that they're not qualified. And so if you're a female, you just have to get over that and just say, that's just a programming, that's just a reaction, and focus on what your skills are and your education, your talents, your experience, and see that you are qualified. And then another thing I would say is to take advantage of opportunities when they're made available to you. And I'm going to tell you one quick anecdote, which is just still shocking to me, is that I try to have a lot of interns and help them, get clerkships, and when I find one that's good. But I had a clerk who had an intern, tons of potential, and it was, it was just this spring, and something in his resume caught my eye, and I said to my clerks, I want to work on him with this particular project. I think his background is suited to it. So I gave this intern, and he's, this chance, and all the other interns have to work for my law clerks. He just blew it, and he didn't do it. It was like, gosh, that was a connection and and a reference, and so you never know when you don't just take advantage of what you're given. Meet who you're introduced to, get to know them, and do all of those things. As far as being a clerk, I can't answer anything specifically on that. And for a prosecutor, send your resume to all the prosecutor's offices you can think of, or that exist in the state. See who you know, get connections, talk to people, show up at fundraisers. If that's, in your county for the district attorney, show up at the DA's fundraiser. And if you want to be a prosecutor, I found that we never hired anybody who was a true believer in prosecution. It was like, that was a dead giveaway. When they just want to be a prosecutor with all their heart and that's the only thing they want to do, that's potential trouble. So we look a little balanced.
So before we hear from Raya, I'm just curious if we could have a show of hands. How many of you had Raya as your mentor? It's not bad, Raya. What did you tell us, that you had about 11? Or was it bigger number than
It
that?
was either 11 or 12. But when I spoke in the first part of the session, Amy had told me that I could talk about the warts of the job and what people did that was not really the best thing. But I remained on the court for 13 years beyond retirement, which shows how much I loved being here. And one of the things I liked most was mentoring. I had such wonderful mentors, and I also had such wonderful law clerks, and I was so proud of them, both the mentees and the law clerks, and I enjoyed working with the clerk's office. And Lena was wonderful when I was single justice, and all of the clerks were really wonderful and taught me so much. And it was a wonderful place for many, many years, and I loved it.
Jane, as a staff attorney, what advice do you have for someone that is interested in that career? And do you think that career choice is compatible with someone that might want to be a judge someday?
It seems like one of the best predictors of getting hired for a staff attorney is to have had some kind of a law clerkship somewhere along the line. And I think that past history will indicate that being a staff attorney is not a stepping stone to being a judge. There have been several instances where staff attorneys have applied numerous times and have never succeeded.
Gina, you were an elected official and now the court administrator here, and so sort of the management side of the law, something I never knew about in law school. What advice do you have for somebody that might be interested in pursuing that type of a career?
I think what I would say is just don't be shy about stepping outside of your comfort zone and doing something different. I have been in private practice. I was in a firm, a solo practitioner. I teach law school at night. Now I'm in the management role. I was an elected official, and I think I've been able to do a lot of different things with a law degree. And I think some people get fixated on, you've got to have the same job for your entire career. And I think that the wonderful part about being involved in the law is that you don't. It's such a versatile thing, and, you can get so much back from, just being involved in the law, and so that's really, I think, the one thing that I would encourage young lawyers to do.
My co-moderator has said I'm allowed to ask her one question. So, Judge Wolhosen, you came from what's called big law. What advice do you have for someone listening who might be interested in that career path and then the pivot from big law to becoming a judge?
So, I think there's, huge predisposition when you're in law school to think that you want to work ultimately for one of the big law firms. And that's not a bad thing, but I think it's important for people to realize it's not the only path for people who want to have sophisticated legal practices where they get great experience. That said, I'm a product of a large law firm, and I'm a huge fan of both my old firm and generally large law firm practice, because it really is practice on the highest level with tremendous amount of training, mentoring, and exposure to really high-profile litigation. That said, it's not a lifestyle for everyone. It is tough, and it is demanding, and everyone knows about the hours. And, I remember being on trial with one of my greatest male mentors who was Jerry Fasher. And we did a 4-month trial together. And that was after sitting in a single room with Jerry for like 9 months, from 7 in the morning to 11 at night, every single day. And I came in one day and I said to him, Jerry, I have a question for you. And he said, what, are you going to ask me to take Easter off? And I was like, no, actually, Jerry, that wasn't what I was going to say, so don't worry. But that was an extreme example, but you will work very, very hard, and that's because of the economics of law firms and the types of practice that they have. It's like all other professional choices. It comes with pros and cons. To make the transition from there to any kind of government service is almost like seeing the opposite side of the coin. When you're in private practice, you're both institutionally and individually, you're often thinking about where's the next case going to come from, where's our business going to come from. That question never crosses my mind here. Like, it's coming up from the clerk's office and it's going to land on my iPad whether I want it or not. And we don't have, it's a little bit more abstract, the notion of your client when you're in government service. We have clients, but they're not the same kind of client that is going to call you on the telephone and ask for something. It's not quite that immediate. It's a more abstract, very rewarding type of client, but it's different. And I think the other big transition is forging your path, which is harder than when you're in private practice. It's never hard to figure out which side of a particular argument you're on, because you're on your client's side of the argument, no matter what. I mean, you may see the weaknesses of it, and that will cause you to make certain strategic choices, but you're looking at the case always from a certain standpoint. And when you come into government practice in whatever form, you're not tied in that way. You really do have to try to navigate your way to what is right and what appears to you to be right. And that's very rewarding, and it's also hard in a new way.
Right. Before I'm going to open it up, if there's just a couple of questions, I'm going to give Judge Drebin the very last word, but I will say a question that I am often asked is, can a woman have it all? And I used to say, of course you can, and I've changed my answer a little bit. It really depends on how you define all. I think I've had it all. I love my life, I love my family life, I love my professional life. But when I listen to my colleagues and friends, I would have never been hired by a big law, I would have never been hired by the clerk's office, I wouldn't have been a staff attorney, there's no way I would have been a law clerk. So having it all, you really do have to define what it means for you. And for me, I have it all, and I'm just so, Judge Shin talked about imposter syndrome yesterday. I would guess it, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I bet most of the women listening and watching have had it at some point. I don't know about the guys, but I will say,
They have it too.
being able to work with such amazing people and learn from them has just been the greatest experience of my life, and so I'm so thrilled that, for me, I have it all. So with that, are there any questions for the panel? If not, Judge Drebin, your last thoughts about women and the appeals court?
Well, I think it's a wonderful job to be a judge, because although, as Judge Wolahoshan said, it's more difficult to decide which side you're on, it's wonderful to be able to decide what you think is right and not to have to do what your client wants you to do. Also wonderful not to worry about billable hours.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Chief Justice Green.
Well, and I've had wonderful colleagues all the way through on the court, even though sometimes they were a little bit not forward enough in recognizing that women were okay. But they were basically wonderful people, and I never worked with as many bright and sympathetic people as I have on the appeals court. And it's wonderful having young people like the law clerks come every year, and how eager they are to learn and how much they have improved during the year. And it's terrific. And I also taught copyright law when Judge Kaplan went to the SJC. And it's more fun working with people than I thought than teaching, or working one-on-one. It's a little bit more satisfying. And in terms of whether one can have it all, that's difficult. I mean, I always felt torn between not having enough time at the court and not having enough time at home. And that, I think, is